Okay. All right. Welcome, everybody, to The Creature Within. This is titled Using Psychology to Understand Frankenstein's Monster. So how many of you are familiar with the Frankenstein story? Is everybody familiar with it already? Okay, great. Awesome. So in the novel, Mary Shelley presents us with a monster whose very existence is complex and difficult. The monster takes his abandonment, abuse, neglect, and maltreatment and turns it into hatred and revenge upon his creator. In this panel discussion, our psychology faculty members will use Frankenstein's monster as a lens through which we can understand psychological theory. Please join us, well, I guess you are already joining us, but for this thought-provoking journey through the corridors of the mind as we seek to unravel one of literature's most enigmatic characters. And just to introduce the panel, my name's Amy Williamson. I am one of the psychology professors, and I'll let each person just kind of introduce. Laura?
Yeah, I'm Laura Lawson-Collins, and I'm another full-time psychology faculty member.
My name is Nick Shizis, and I've been teaching psychology for 20 years, and we're currently here with my personality course.
My name is Mitch Baker. I teach lifespan developmental psychology, which is the class that I have here as well.
Okay. Okay, so my esteemed colleagues will be answering various questions that I'll be presenting, but if you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand or let me know and you can ask questions too. Okay? All right, let's get started. So to start off with, could you tell us a little bit about the psychology of monsters and monstrosity?
So I'm going to take this one and start this off. So when we think about the story of Frankenstein, I think it's important to think about why we really enjoy talking about and thinking about monsters and why we're so enamored of horror. And I think that, you know, there are a few explanations from psychology. One explanation is that we tend to pay attention to things that are dangerous. You know, in terms of evolution, it makes sense for us to really hone in on things that might be dangerous for us. So we tend to pay more attention to those things. And in addition to that, horror, both movies and novels, allows us to do that and kind of get that adrenaline rush and that thrill, but in a safe way, right? It's kind of like roller coasters where you can have that adrenaline rush, but you're still, you know that you're safe. And it's similar with horror movies. It allows us to experience that rush and that maybe some fear while still remaining safe.
Thank you, Laura. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about what led Frankenstein to create the monster. So could you talk a little bit about the aspects of Frankenstein's life that might have led him in this direction?
Go ahead, Mitch. I could say a couple words about that regarding personality. If you look at what motivated Victor Frankenstein, I think I can make a parallel with Adlerian theory. You know, Adler believes that our behaviors are motivated by success or by superiority, right? In our class, we talked about that. And his obsession with being famous and, you know, making a worldwide discovery might stem from some type of inferiority. I know one of my colleagues might talk about the passing of his mother as well, but he channels that into learning how to bring the dead back to life. I think it's somewhat narcissistic, right? To imagine that I'm going to create something better than what we already have. Maybe, you know, and again, not to speak religiously, but to think that like he could be godlike or above godlike might be somewhat narcissistic to create new life from the dead. So if he were a psychologically healthy guy, he would be driven by success. He would want to create a new species to help mankind be more successful and help the creature cooperate, perhaps. If he were healthy again, according to Adler, he would be concerned with goals beyond his personal fame, and he would do it without expecting payoff or recognition. But if you read the book, you're going to notice he's not that psychologically healthy. He has some mental health issues of his own. And so he was probably driven by superiority instead, did not have concern for others, including the creature itself too, like discarded the creature, called him his enemy, and like was super disgusted by it. And so he was in it for personal gain, fame, and glory, which Adler says is characteristic of unhealthy people, narcissistic people, self-centered individuals. And he let the creature loose. Never wanted to see it again, you know, and he was happy when he went back to his apartment and the creature was gone. So he really didn't care. And so I would say I think partly that's what kind of motivated him, to be honest with you. And he wanted to pick beautiful body parts, and he was like really worried about perfection. And I don't know what he thought was going to happen, but when he saw the yellow eyes, you know, the watery eyes, you know, and you know the creature's kind of reaching out, he just said, you know what? These past 2 years of all this work, I don't want to deal with this anymore. And so when it didn't turn out the way that he wanted to, he just kind of discarded it, which I think he was more obsessed with fame and the obsession of like wanting to make perfect things, which would indicate more superiority than anything else. I'm going to turn it to my colleague as well, who's going to share more.
All right, thank you, Nick. So just out of curiosity, how many of you actually read or skimmed through the novel of Frankenstein? Okay, just to get a sense, because I had skimmed through it maybe in high school, and then I reread it or reapproached it the last couple of this last month, and it was so different than I remembered it. So that was one thing, and so then I want to ask you this, right? Since the question is like what are basically our earlier experiences and how do they influence our decisions later in life? So think about that for yourself. Like, what brought you to Moraine? What aspects of your life was it that you had family support to education? Are you here because that the family sacrificed some things? Were some of your families saying, you know what, you should get a job, and they don't support you here, but you're doing it anyways? So think about your own life as the parallel. But with that, you know, I want to kind of also put in there, because we're going to talk about, there's going to be some overlap. There's a little foreshadowing about some of the theories and attachment theory and parenting styles. But I also want to mention that you could do everything right. So this is my inference or my interpretation of Mary Shelley's work. And it's that, you know, Victor Frankenstein was, and sorry, I just want to like have young Frankenstein and call him Frankenstein, but that's, you know, if you haven't seen that movie, but be that as it may, you know, you could do everything right. I believe his family raised him with the best intentions, kind of created this doting life for him, this traditional family style with a lot of love, a lot of affection, support, encouragement, right? He has this growing up. He has all these things that you think would make for a well-adjusted, wonderful human being that was modeled how to care for somebody, how to love, how to receive love. And then ultimately, like if you haven't, you know, if the familiarity with the book, but his mom attends to the kind of their adopted, their cousin or their adopted child, their adopted daughter, Elizabeth, who like becomes the love interest of Victor, if you're not familiar. And she raises it. She kind of nurses her back to health. And in doing so, I think it was rheumatic fever maybe? Scarlet fever, thank you. Scarlet fever. And then she catches that and dies. And then that triggers, this is right before Victor's about to go off to college, right? So he's, you know, he's a young man, he's going off, and this happens, and this might have changed, right, to the narcissistic approach, where all of a sudden he becomes enamored with life and feeling like that maybe I can go beyond and be, to use your word, like more godlike, and, you know, take this very solipsistic view where all of his knowledge is the one knowledge that matters, and that he's going to go ahead and reanimate life. And maybe this is some way, right? This is the clinician in me, you know, armchairing that maybe this is somehow he can reclaim the loss of his mom in trying to go ahead and do these things. So most of us, like, if you operate from the ideology that behavior is intentional and purposeful, it's probably coming from somewhere, something that you experienced, something that's motivating you in this particular direction. So when you think about why would Frankenstein want to create life, you know, one, he believes there's that narcissism in there that says, I can do this better than anybody. I'm smart enough, I'm capable. And the interesting thing too, along that line, has this very intelligent, a lot of support, but at the same time, he's very immature. And if you took the lifespan class, and we're not there yet, but you'll hear about Perry's theory and the way his approach to college students. And he says that, like, so Perry's theory is that you have like college students are really eager to learn, and they come in with this world of knowledge, and it starts off as dualistic. They believe they know everything, and then what happens is they become like, I'm sure this is happening while with this dream team of a panelist here. You know, like you become in awe with what like these people who are studied and what their knowledge is, and it replaces yours. It's an either or situation. So you go off, you're thinking, so he liked alchemy, he liked this stuff, this is what he was interested in. And then his dad, the other professors, he says, no, those are foolish thoughts you have. Your life, your view that you came in is foolish. What you need is natural sciences. You need chemistry. This is what's good. And then he throws out the interest of his own to replace it with that other knowledge. And then ultimately never really matures to the relativistic perspective. But the view is that he's kind of coming in with this life, this type of parenting style, which we'll get to later, that was supportive, that should have given him the model for all these things, but then ultimately and ironically is unable to actually share those same things and patterns that he learned with this creation, his child, if you will.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Thanks, Mitch. And kind of piggybacking on that topic of kind of what's happening with him in the land of nurturing, to what degree do you think nature and nurture influences behavior? What does that look like in regard to Frankenstein? I think, Mitch, you're...
Okay,
yeah.
am I going up first? Or
Yeah.
do you want-
I'm going to talk about antisocial personality disorder, maybe in the lens of parenting.
Okay, so now I got nature. So if you're not familiar with the concept of nature and nurture, right? It's these forces that kind of contribute to the development of a person. And nature is your biology, right? I know we often think of nature as like the pretty trees outside, but nature is your heredity, the genetic piece to it. Nurture is the environment and the experiences in which we have. So it's not necessarily like which one has the influence, but how these things work together, right? So there are these forces that can influence one over the other. So the monster claims, like, most of us have this image of the monster, of Frankenstein, the monster, being this mindless, murdering thing, but he's not. He actually says he was born, he refers to himself kind of as this Adam, right? Like the story of Adam and Eve, like he should have been the Adam. And he was born of love and humanity, and it was only when in that he had virtue and benevolence and nothing but care and love. Which was interesting that the monster himself is saying that I was born morally okay, morally right. Like my nature, the human nature, the nature is for that of being kind, for love, for benevolence, for caring. And it was so that would be the nature. So he's saying the nature aspect is the biology, is that we're morally good, right? Which is interesting because, most of, outside of Christianity, which comes from the idea of original sin, right? That we're born, like from Adam, we're born sinful and in need of saving. There's really no other philosophy or religion that I'm familiar with. I'm sure there's something out there that actually says we're born morally one way or the other. It's more like tabula rasa, more like, it's the blank slate idea that we kind of get exposed to things and then that shapes our behavior, whether we're shared with this love and become good or whether or not. But either way, so taking this approach, it's that we're born nice, we're born loving. And then it was the rebuff that Frankenstein gave to his monster, as Nick pointed out, when he came to life and saw these things and was beaten and like engrossed by the look of him, right? So it was just the looks of this monster is what made Victor totally reject and neglect him. And it was that rejection and neglection, right? That's the nurture. That's the experience. So think about it this way. Were you called the pretty princess, or stupid and ugly, right? And how would you might respond if that's the kind of environment you grew up in? And were you received? Were you cared for? Were you nurtured to bring out those good things? If not, all that's the experience, right? That's the nurture. Nature-wise, we're born taking this stance that we're born good, we're born benevolent, we're born caring and loving and kind. But if you're just constantly neglected, constantly beat down, where at some point are you going to find that strength to actually show love and give this? And that's the nurture. That's the competing forces that we have here. So in tandem, it works beautifully, right? You have this this propensity towards love and affection, but it's got to be met with something to nurture and grow that. And that's based on the experiences that we have.
Nick, did you want to comment on that as well with the development of antisocial?
Yeah, I certainly
personality?
can. I mean, I haven't read that book in 30 years, and I started reading it again, and I was just again surprised at how quickly the creature picked up on language, picked up on, kind of started feeding himself, with the berries in the woods and whatnot, and he had an inherent need, and like almost an innate potential to want to connect with people, help those people out in the cottage and whatnot. And Mitch, you're right. I mean, when you've been told all throughout your life that you're garbage, right? You're despicable and disgusting, and people, physically abuse you and beat you and whatnot, it's not gonna turn out well, folks. And historically, it has not turned out well. And I have hundreds of studies to show that it has not turned well. So I might take a little bit of time here, if it's okay with everybody, to kind of tell you some of the stuff that I came up with. The news is not great, and I don't think you would need too much convincing that maltreatment and abuse and neglect is going to turn somebody into an aggressive, hostile individual. Are you ready for this? Okay. So after I read the book again, I was really intrigued by how the creature who was abandoned and discarded by the creator, and by others in society, as you'll see if you read the book, and how this person can turn into a violent individual capable of revenge and murder. I think we can make a lot of parallels, folks, between thinking about an individual that experiences antisocial personality disorder and the abuse, neglect, and maltreatment that they've experienced growing up. An individual with antisocial personality disorder, some people might call them sociopaths, some people might call them psychopaths. And if you're wondering what the difference is between those two, the psychopath individual has no moral conscience at all, right? They have no right or wrong, differentiation. A sociopath has the potential to feel guilt, has the potential to feel emotions and that kind of thing, but they can turn it on. They can turn it on and off, depending on if they care about the situation or if they care about the people that are involved. And so the characteristics of antisocial personality disorder, they're impulsive. Sometimes they don't plan ahead. They tend to be irritable, hostile, aggressive towards others. They don't show regard for their own safety or for the safety of other people. They are consistently irresponsible, and they lack remorse for harming other people. So if you think, I would make a case certainly that the creature was sociopathic. I think Victor was sociopathic too, because he didn't care about the creature either. So you look at the creature. He killed Victor's little brother, William. He kills Victor's best friend from childhood, Clerval. He tells Victor, I'm going to see you at your wedding, and then murders his wife, and he kills Elizabeth by strangulation. So the research is pretty clear that abuse is linked with sociopathic type of behaviors. One study that I read about in 2001 from a professor named Horowitz, they gathered 20 years of court cases rather, of child abuse and neglect, and they found that those who experienced abuse, maltreatment, abandonment, and neglect when growing up was highly correlated with higher rates of depression, anxiety, drug use, alcohol use, personality disorders, criminal behavior, problems with anger, problems with violence. And folks, if you ask me, can you find a study about neglect and depression? Here's 1,000 of them. A study about neglect and anxiety, here's another 1,000. Neglect and alcohol abuse, here's another 1,000. I mean, it's, the spectrum is huge with all that stuff. And so and they have low tolerance for stress, especially if they've experienced family violence. So we certainly saw this with the creature who wanted revenge against Victor. And when he asked Victor to create a bride for him, Victor refused, and he kills the best friend. And he meets the boy, William. He finds out that the boy is a Frankenstein, and which I also did want to say Frankenstein. He finds out that the little kid is a Frankenstein, and he gets filled with rage, and he strangles the kid. He tells Victor again, hey, make me a bride. I need a companion. Victor says, I don't want to make a race of devil type of people, And so he goes, and he's shaking his hands, saying, well, I'm going to get revenge on you, and I'm going to see you at your wedding, and then ends up killing his wife. So yeah, in the case of antisocial personality disorder, we see that type of anger from within being displaced on other individuals, And so ultimately, folks, I think we can make a huge case. Abusive personalities, you have individuals that cannot control their anger as adults. Abusive men tend to have backgrounds that are very similar to victims of PTSD. And so what we might see, these behaviors that they have might really be just a big stress response. And so, I don't know. I feel bad. I do. I feel bad. I know it's a fictional character, right? But I feel bad for the potential that this could have been somebody. I'm not going to go off the cuff here, but I've had clients in my past who tell me things that I can't even fathom that could have happened to somebody, right? And I have clients telling me, these things were done to me, cigarette burns on my back, and one client's showing me them. I'm like, no, I don't want to see that. But what can I do? And the client tells me, it's never going to be me again. I've done some really bad things and I try to control it, but I'm never going to be the victim ever again. And so you think about it, it just makes sense that these things could potentially happen. So Victor rejects the creature. He's disgusted by it. The creature doesn't know what to do, and he leaves. He finds people, and he's just experienced a lot of trauma. And I'm going to end with this. I think the creature could have been a pretty good person, right? He had the potential to be a good person. But he goes into the town. He gets beaten by the town people. They run away and scream. His creator rejects him. He finds this family in a cottage. He wants to connect with them. He finally gets the courage to meet the blind man, which I can't, again, if you should watch Young Frankenstein. It's a really funny comedy from the 70s. I think Gene Hackman played him, right? And then the kids walk in and get freaked out, and they beat him. At some point, the monster is saving a little girl who's drowning, right? And then the father of the little girl sees him and thinks he's attacking her and shoots him in the shoulder, and this guy's trying to save somebody. I was going to be like, yeah, thanks for shooting me. I was just trying to help. So his first 4 interactions with humans, folks, are to be beaten, to be rejected, and to be scorned in the society. So I understand how he became the way that he became. And research will show that over and over and over again. And it's sad. This could have been prevented.
Okay, thanks, Nick.
Yeah,
and
no,
I
thank
think
you, thank you.
You talked a little bit about kind of the attachment rupturing, right, and causing these problems. So, Laura, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to, do you think these connections can ever be formed at all when something's ruptured to that extent?
Yeah, so everything that Nick says or said is completely valid. There are so many studies out there connecting early abuse with later problems. But I do also just want to make sure that we all understand that it's not an absolute, so that it's a 100% of the time. If you experience abuse in your childhood, then you're going to become a sociopath. 80% of kids who were abused when they were kids grow up to not abuse their own kids. So it's still a higher proportion than kids who weren't abused to abuse. But if you experienced something horrible in your childhood, I don't want you to feel like you're doomed. And you can go on to develop, healthy behaviors. Again, not to say what Nick said is inaccurate. It is accurate. There's lots of research that shows that it puts you at risk, right? But it's not an absolute, like, this is absolutely how you're going to turn out. And so having relationships with other adults who aren't your parents, who are caring adults, whether that's an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent, a teacher, religious figure in your life as you're growing up, those things can make a big difference. And in addition, people can work through therapy on developing empathy and developing connection and trying to learn how to be vulnerable with other people. So I do just want to, make sure that you guys don't walk away from this thinking like, this is destiny if you experience these horrible things when you were a kid. To go back on kind of the negative side, I do just want to say It does increase your risk for physical illness as well. So there's this concept called ACEs, which is aversive childhood events. And these events, these things that can happen to you when you're a child, there are a certain number of them. If you have a higher number versus a lower number, you're at risk for all sorts of physical problems later on in life, from heart disease to cancer to stroke, to mental illness and suicide risk. So again, it does predispose you to negative potential outcomes, but it is a risk. It's not an absolute.
If I can just piggyback and also say a couple words about that too. In all the studies that I read, not everybody became sociopathic. And the studies that I read about the sociopaths, those people were already in jail. Right. They were already incarcerated. Then they asked them about their background, and that's what they found kind of a big denominator. But if we're talking 80%, the researchers of the studies that I read didn't interview the 80% that are not in jail.
Right.
But I would say if they did, those individuals that were not put in jail because of criminal behaviors, I think they would have been more at risk for the depression, the anxiety, substances, which are not sociopathic things.
Right.
And thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah. And I did also want to mention that, having that kind of experience growing up, combining that with a certain physiological profile can also put you at higher risk for becoming probably more a psychopath as opposed to a sociopath, but certainly exhibiting antisocial personality disorder tendencies. For example, there's a neuroscientist named James Fallon, and what he looks at are brain scans. That's what he does all day, and he was interested in, are there brain scans that are consistent with people who are psychopaths or people who show antisocial personality disorder. And he has developed a profile based on PET scans, and he's also developed a genetic profile as well. And so he was doing these analyses of these PET scans, and he had his family go through these PET scans as well, because he was also looking at Alzheimer's disease, in his own family history. And he decided, I'm going to look at my family's PET scans, see if anybody is showing these indicators in the brain of, tendency towards psychopathy. And all of the scans were what's called blinded. That means that they didn't have the relatives' names on them, so he couldn't tell who was who, right? So he was trying to be as unbiased as he could. And as he's looking through these scans, these particular set jumps out at him, and he looks at this scan and he's like, man, they've got this characteristic and this characteristic. There are different parts of the frontal and temporal lobes that are linked with empathy and helping others and perspective taking and that kind of thing that show up a little differently in a PET scan of someone who would be considered, say, a psychopath. And he saw this one person in his family, and he's like, man, who is this person, And this person also had genetic indicators that seemed to be tied to psychopathy. And so he finally unmasked the numbers, to see, like, who is this person? And it was him. They were his own scans. And that kind of sent him down a road of, well, geez, do I have these characteristics? Do I lack empathy? And sent him down a road of, thinking about his own characteristics and, maybe what is he lacking? What's different about him? And, he said that although he's got these physiological tendencies, these neurological tendencies, the thing that he feels makes him different from the average person in prison, whose Nick's research focuses on, is that his childhood was kind of an idyllic childhood. And he was the first grandchild in his family, and so, aunts and uncles and grandparents all doted upon him. He got a lot of attention. When he did something mean to an animal when he was a child. It was met with love and understanding by his parents instead of harsh punishment. He didn't go through all of these horrific experiences that you often see in these studies that Nick's talking about. And so he argues that it's this combination of not only these physiological predispositions, but also, the mistreatment, the early mistreatment. And so having both seems to be important.
Yeah, you bring up the parenting styles, right? So Diane Baumrind has this theory of different parenting styles. And based on what you're exposed to is going to influence maybe how you respond into the social world or even like the structured world. So, if we're keeping it with, the story of Frankenstein, if you look at Victor as being the father or the creator, right, the parent, and the monster being the child, and it's horrible just to, like, the monster just, already, sets us up for a bias. But this benign kind of creature, right, who becomes the monster, is really a response to neglectful parenting. And we know that in like 91, Baumrind like kind of wrote down like neglectful parenting, parents have shown the least favorable outcomes, right? So children of neglectful parenting show the least favorable outcomes: lacking self-regulation, social responsibility, I got a list here, poor self-reliance, social competence, poor school competence, antisocial behavior, delinquency, anxiety, depression, and significant increase in somatic complaints, meaning like, creation of the body, like feeling like headaches, stomach aches, things like that due to neglect. So this is the kind of byproduct you have when you have neglectful parenting. So if you have someone who's just basically abandoning you, saying, well, go out to the world and good luck. I'm not going to care for you. I'm not going to provide some things. In fact, I might withhold some things to give you that opportunity. Maybe you have a parent who, doesn't want you to be better than them. I mean, there are parents, speaking from the clinical standpoint, I've had the clients I've seen, like I've had moms who've said that I don't want my child to be better than me. Like I want the best life. It's not everyone's like just perfect love. And to hear those things and to understand that some people are thinking that way, right? It's like that is like, just imagine the household you grew up in. If they're purposely holding you back, withholding something to maybe make you move forward. So it's no doubt that in the book, you see this person who he even says, he's like, all I really want is for like, I've become evil, he kind of says, like, but all I need is some love, right? And that goes to the point that you're not doomed. I can be good again, right? And this can come into play of maybe you find someone, maybe it's a teacher, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a romantic partner that really cultivates these things, and it's very hard for you to overcome those points because you're never going to be the same. You can't go back in time and undo what's been done, right? And one of the horrible things about psychology is that there's no cures. There's no cures, right? You're never like gonna lose whatever it was. It's just whether you somehow reclaim it or reframe it. And that's kind of the ultimate the goal is when you're like therapeutically you're looking down that road. But so what you want is people who are like talking things through the way you described the neuroscientist.
James
Fallon, yeah. Like that he had family that talked to things. Like, well, why do you think this is the case? That, that authoritative kind of style of parenting by Baumrind would define that. To say like, you can have a different perspective, but we're going to walk you through this. We're going to talk this out and have the support. So the type of parents that you have definitely play a role is to the type of emerging adult you're going to become or person you're going to become at every different stage, even as childhood. So but it's not that you're doomed to that, and then sticking one last point is that you have where he runs and hides and finds this, he goes to the cottages and he finds a surrogate, this other family, the blind old man and like the family. It's like, you can have a mentor that doesn't know you. You can have someone, a fictional character on a TV show that you identify with, that you feel like, this is like, that's my dad. I wish that was my mom, that type of thing. And learn through them vicariously, right, what it's like to feel that way. But at some point, you're going to need that physical closeness, that touch, and that's what he does. He pushes it and then tries to introduce himself and then gets rebuffed again. and just solidifies, I have no one in my life, and this is kind of the path
So
for me.
can I, yeah,
Yeah.
just kind
He
I
tried.
know we're running low on, short on time, but I wanted to know if any of you, and Mitch, you might want to talk about this, is I think one of the pieces that we haven't talked about, that I think it's really important in parenting and all these other things is culture, the impact of culture and the impact of the larger society. So if I'm growing up in an environment that's loving, but I'm going out into the world where I'm experiencing all of these kinds of negative things about me, what's the interaction there? What does that look like? How do we kind of pull that into the discussion on raising or nature and nurture? Where would that come in?
Good.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got a lot of social psychology here, right? So you can have a wonderful, loving, caring family, but if you're growing up in a society that is not loving and caring towards you or your family, that can create a lot of problems as well. Certainly, having that loving, caring family gives you an advantage, right, that other people might not have, but you still need to figure out a way to make your way in a dangerous world, and people in all countries, many different people in all countries, experience this through stigma, through stereotypes and prejudice, whether it be about the color of their skin or their sexual orientation, or how they look, as in the book, just having features that don't correspond to the standard that's brought forth, and all of those pressures can create anxiety and depression, and behavioral problems, even in those who have a lot of support at home. You have to consider the wider context as well. That's part of nurture.
And I think you have to consider too that, when people come, if you were to immigrate to a different country, you may not look the same, speak the same and whatnot. And there is prejudice out there and rejection. And a lot of people have had to give up part of their identities and acculturate into the larger culture, And I know it's not so great to lose kind of who you are, but I think that speaks to some of our survival skills too. But I think you can also try to find where your community is. I think a lot of people could do that. Find where you could potentially connect, whether it's through volunteering or, clubs or organizations or whatnot. I mean, I guess you can. But the trade-off is that in a lot of aspects, you might have to just assimilate a bit too.
I guess the reason, the reason I'm even asking that question is because psychology has traditionally looked at the problem as within the individual. It's a problem within me. And
Systemic.
if we broaden it to look at, if somebody's coming in because, like, they're disfigured, they're ableism and all those things, they look different, and they're coming in and saying they're depressed, are we going to look within the person, or are we going to be exploring more of the outside variables? So that's
Right.
so.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great point that you bring up. I mean, the importance of the cultural dynamic on the lens in which we view the world, right? So knowing that from the inner culture, like our families, the religious organizations you might or may not belong to, but the inner circle that you have that kind of shape directly what your culture is about is going to have a big, it's going to shape a lot of your perceptions. But to the point that I think you're getting at is, you might, once you leave the family dynamic, right? Like how do you break from some of that thing? Let's say you come from a family who has a lot of biases that they're holding in stereotypes that are negative against other groups of people. And then you come to college and you're interacting with a multicultural group of people. The question is like, can you, and this goes back to Perry's theory, honestly, like where you, from dualistic to relativistic thinking. Ultimately, the goal of education is for you to understand that people might have different perspectives than you, while not all of them apply to you. Not that you even ideally, I mean, it would be great if you could celebrate all those differences, but at the very least, you come to understand that the things that are right for you are right for you, and I don't have to make you on my side for you to be a good person too. And I think that's like when I look at one of the great, like what education is and why it's such a great equalizer, I truly believe it's from that standpoint. And there's another theorist like Lev Vygotsky who talks about like how learning, right? That what we learn, our culture actually shapes the way we develop. So, and I don't know if this stat is still true. Last I checked, it was pre-pandemic, but it was like, 80% of the people, right? Four out of 5 people that are born in poverty remain in poverty. And a lot of the times it's so hard to get out of the box that you know. But those of us who get exposed to other things from that other cultural perspective, then that brings in a way of thinking that could be different than the one that we're kind of streamlined having, which is a very difficult process because we have those biases and they've reinforced the successes which we've had. And that's, and then you can bring in the idea of privilege and everything else that comes with that. So
Research has shown too that if we create anti-stigma programs, people think differently about psychological disorders today than they did 50 years ago. People think differently about individuals with developmental disabilities differently today than they did years ago, and they're treated differently. And I think that's all because of the advocacy and the anti-stigma and the education that we've experienced too. And so there's things that could be done systemically to help change the public perception. And then maybe, in Frankenstein's day, there could have been advocacy to show that, if they had created more beings like that, these people have potential. Thank you.
Laura, do you want to have a final comment on that?
I think that, when you have a situation like that, you can sometimes take the stigma from the outside and internalize it and start to view yourself that way. And that can be a problem as well. In addition to restricted opportunities and social isolation, all of those things can contribute to it being more difficult when you are in a stigmatized group or a group that's, there are negative stereotypes being held about.
yeah, self-hatred, right?
Yeah.
Right, right.
Self-hating groups.
I mean, the creature looked in the pond and looked at himself and goes, "Oh man, now I know why everybody responds that way to me, because I am ugly." But if he was taught to love himself the way that he looks, right? If there wasn't the stigma, he wouldn't feel that way.
But it would have to be not just Frankenstein who taught him that. It would need to be
The society,
the culture around
Yeah,
him.
the culture
as
defined
well.
him as ugly.
Right.
If he was well received and loved and given cared for, he would have looked in that pond and saw a beautiful person.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the cultural shape.
Okay, thank you very much to our panel. I guess we'll open up for questions now.
Yeah, please.
Questions.
Yeah, if you have any questions, grab the mic, ask
Comments?
it. We'll try comments, anything you want to share. Try to answer it. Would anybody like to share a comment?
Yeah.
And the reason that we have the mics is just because the recording's happening and so we can hear.
Did you guys say Frankenstein was sociopathic or psychopathic?
I think he was, if you look at the definition for sociopaths versus psychopaths, right? He would be sociopathic because the sociopath has the capacity to feel guilt and other emotions. The psychopath does not have that capability at all. So I would say he's sociopathic. He's able to turn it on and off.
Well, when you said that he killed the guy's wife, when he said
He killed 3 people.
Yeah, did he feel guilt for that or no?
I don't know. I think in those cases, I think maybe he reflected on that. I don't recall reading that he felt bad about that. I think he did that just out of spite and revenge. I know that when he killed the wife or the new bride, he was looking at Victor through a window and was like pointing at her like, look what I did. So I don't think he felt bad. I think he did it for pure revenge.
Yeah, I think he felt justified.
Justified.
Which I think
Validated.
a lot of us do. We rationalize our bad behavior. And I think he definitely did that.
Mm-hmm. Trying to think of when he would have felt bad or remorse.
The child.
Yeah, the kid.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, once he found out, right? Good question. Thanks for your question. But yeah, the sociopath can feel some emotions when it's important to them.
Good.
Hi, I was going to ask if you think that the creation of Frankenstein was a reflection of Victor, like an alter ego or something like that.
Oh, think about that.
I thought about that when I was reading
Yeah.
it, like a Jekyll and Hyde kind of concept, right? It was, the reality is, I think ultimately that kind of goes with the antisocial and maybe the narcissism or solipsism, whatever you want to call it, you know, that Victor displayed, even though he, like after he creates this, like, you know, it become, I don't think Victor was intended on being this harmful, hurtful person, right? But I do believe that it was, you know, his behaviors are what created everything that he detested. So
Yeah.
like the whole irony of the book is like everything that he believed and loved and wanted, he ultimately was his actions that created the, you know, the antithesis of all that.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about that, you know.
Yeah. The reason like that question came to mind is I feel like Frankenstein has been like portrayed in so many different ways, but we always view like the creature he created as the bad part, and no one ever thinks of why Victor did that, or like how that reflects on his character rather than his creation, if that makes sense.
I mean, it's the, you know, this is beyond my pay grade because this is like now literature. This would be better for an English professor, but
Yeah.
that's like kind of the reliability of the narrator, which is Victor, right? You know, in part where he's rationalizing all of his behaviors of why he did what he did. So we want to sympathize with him, you know, and in like think of the monster as bad. Right, so as you're reading this, like his rational thought, as they pointed out, those are the things that are giving us pause to kind of want to, this guy who basically neglected and ran away and you know, created this monster by his own actions. I think she tries to make us feel sympathetic to him because
Yeah.
of his rational thought.
So you're saying Shelley tried to make us feel sympathy for Victor?
Yeah, at times.
So my reading of it was that the message that we're supposed to take away is that Victor is really the monster.
Right, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. But I
Yeah.
think that's the dynamic of Victor's like trying to fleece us. That's, I mean, the reliability of him. He's trying to fleece us into thinking that like he's the one that's good and not the monster. When the reality
really
is
it's the
monster.
reverse.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to reflect on Sarah's comment, I don't know if I would think of the creature as an alter ego, perhaps. I think the creature served the purpose for him. If you read the book, and it's an 8-hour listen, by the way, if you listen to it through audiobook, I found out, you're going to find this theme of loneliness throughout. You know, the creature's lonely, but Victor's lonely too, right? Loses mom, and goes away to college and is lonely. And so it's possible, Sarah, that he created this creature for companionship, to have somebody to be with, right? And so I think maybe that could be one purpose that we're looking at here of what did the creature intend to be? Certainly a show of fame, right? But also for companionship and not to be alone too. I think that could be one piece.
What do you have to say to people who might identify with Frankenstein, who like didn't have great parents, or they kind of just like feel emotionless and like they're moving through the motions of their lives, and maybe they don't have enough money for therapy? Like, what's some actions that they could do to help their own mental state?
You know, I think one thing that you can do that's practical and you know, maybe easy is the wrong word, but is helping others, is finding a cause that you care about and volunteering and figuring out how to contribute to that cause. There's a lot of research to show that when we feel that we are helping someone else or a group, that we start to feel better about ourselves, and also just brings more happiness and joy in. And it can make your life feel more meaningful.
Gives your life purpose, and it also helps you find a community too that you can connect with, because when you're volunteering with other people, you all of you care about the same thing, and you're meeting individuals that have the same core values that you do as well, and it gives you a sense of purpose, meaning, and intentionality. And that's a pretty common thing. Amara, you asked that, right? That's a pretty common thing in therapy, to encourage people to volunteer who feel isolated. And we talked about that in last year's panel discussion on loneliness. Volunteering is a huge way to do it.
You know, one other beautiful thing is not directed at you, but to anyone. One of the nice things, if you are a student here, is that we have free counseling for you to actually speak to somebody in the S building. And that would be something that would be beneficial. So you don't feel like you have to go at it alone and get some insight into some of these things, right? So there are resources that the college provides by being part of this community that's really welcoming and helpful. But to echo their sentiments, I think that as we're forging our identity, we do need to be mindful about who we're identifying with, and attaching ourselves to the goals that we want to become versus maybe some of the things we're trying to avoid. So
Yeah, and piggybacking on that, just creating intentional community.
Yeah.
Creating intentional community beyond the family that you're born with, creating family. And again, to Mitch's point, who have goals that you aspire to, as opposed to maybe where you feel stuck.
In the story, the monster asks for a companion throughout the story. So do you think that if Victor had created a companion for him, things would have turned out different or mostly the same?
If you use the same process in creating the bride, I think the creature would have been happy, could have been happy. They were planning on moving to South America. And, he's like, we'll never hear from you. You'll never hear from us again. I think he had the potential to be happy. Victor was just afraid that what if she is even more evil than this one? And, he just kind of held back. He was afraid of he was afraid of having another reaction. So what would have happened? I can only speculate that the creature would have found purpose, right? Would have then had an appreciation of life. My life early was really bad, and now it's great, and I'm just so happy now, like the rest of his life. He could have had a new perspective, I suppose. We won't know.
I would throw in there's no guarantee that she would like him.
yeah.
We're assuming that she's going to see him and fall in love. She may also see some of the same things that he sees, and you may have two incredibly unhappy people together.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's one other parallel that I couldn't help but think when I was reading this, and I overthought the Hunger Games more than any human should. But I was thinking about what would have that looked like, and I was thinking about Katniss and Peeta, actually. At the end, you have two really damaged people that the only people that can understand me is possibly you. And that's why in the end you have those two together, and that's it. And they really can't connect to an outside world. They live in their own little hub, and that's the end of it. I told you I overthought this book more than anyone should, but and it's and I thought about what would that look like, and I really pictured that kind of dynamic of those two characters, and I'm a romantic at heart, so I'd hope that they'd want to, but who knows? She might be like, man, you're ugly, I don't like you, who knows? So
right, just because we have things in common with somebody doesn't mean we're going to be attracted to them. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Chase
over here.
Thank you for your comments, everybody, and your questions. This is really great.
So was the main reason why that the doctor Victor didn't neglected him and beat him was just because he was ugly? Because I figured he would see that before he was alive.
That's what I thought too. I thought about what did he expect? He just didn't. I don't know. He brings him alive, and the skin, I guess, is really thin, and the veins are protruding. The eyes are yellow. The mouth is black. He probably didn't gamble on that. He didn't predict that. But he's a perfectionist. And Victor's a perfectionist, and he's narcissistic, and he pillages, pilfers through these body parts to find perfect body parts, and he sees this thing, and it's just not what he expected. I want to be sure that I answered your question, though. Can you ask that one more time?
Yeah, well, I was just I feel like him neglecting him and kind of just putting him aside because he's simply ugly. I feel like that was kind of just awful.
And you're asking
so
what did he think was going to happen?
Yeah, what do you think was going to happen when he's piecing this person together and stitching them up? I assume he would see that
Chase,
he's going to be
did he
ugly.
look different before he came alive? Probably.
Probably.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I almost felt like at that point in the book, it was this automatic disgust reaction, just an overwhelming disgust at what he had done. And he had this single-mindedness, and no one could alter his path And that was all that he thought about and all that he obsessed about. And then he finally gets to it, and it's an immediate disgust reaction, and then this realization that I just did the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And
that's a
so
good point,
instead
too.
of
That's a good
confronting it and dealing with it in a mature way, as
Runs
Mitch
away.
said, you know, it was a completely immature, just running away reaction.
Do you think that if Victor made Frankenstein, and if Frankenstein came out as perfect, do you think that Victor would have had the same reaction that he did with Frankenstein that he did during the book?
That's a great question. It'd be a very different novel, that's for sure.
That's for sure.
You know, it's hard to say, right? So if kind of combining both of your comments or questions, it's like the Turing test or the uncanny valley, you know, I was also thinking about the parallels of AI today when I'm reading this, as that we're going forward ahead with like a science that we really don't understand and the full impacts of this. And we get to the point where we actually create something, we now have to live with that creation. We can't turn it away. So would it have been perfect and idealistic? You know, would he have, I think if it passed all those measures, I think so. But I still think, you know, the clinical part of me that still says that a lot of that motivation was to be revered and kind of bring his mom back somehow. And like the fact that that creation didn't bring her back to life as well, we're never really satisfied, you know.
Alex, there's some parents out there who want to have kids, right? And they want to identify as parents. I mean, whether that's a cultural thing for them or that's kind of what you were raised with as far as like the values that you should have. And then they have kids who, you know, kids fine, but they just turn out not to be good parents ultimately. It's stressful for them, right? Their psychological issues get in the way. So, I mean, if we have to think that Victor maybe had some psychological issues of his own, whether if the creature was perfect, he could have turned out to be a bad dad anyway. I mean, we ultimately don't know exactly what we're going to be like when we become parents. We hope that we're going to be good. It's a hard job. And so even if the creature was perfect, we don't know what his parenting skills, or would he have been interested in being a better parent? We don't know.
So you said that he strives perfection, and
That's what I get from that.
so the reason that he didn't make a bride is because he didn't want to basically mess up again and not bring another like non-perfect being into this world. So do you think that if he made the bride and then they moved to South America, that Frankenstein would still have basically the nature and the brain chemistry to murder and like still have the, instead of like being happy with the bride? Do you think Frankenstein would murder if he had the bride still?
We don't know. I mean, we got Gabby's point that she's, you know, and Professor Lawson Collins here is saying that we don't even know. We don't know what would have happened. I mean, if she would have rejected him too, I mean, just because two people have similar things in common doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to connect. And also, I think, Laura has a lot of weight in what she said, that he had an immediate disgust. He immediately said, you know, what I did was wrong. I just don't think he wanted to do that again. He didn't want to be in that situation again.
You mentioned parenting styles. Do you agree with the phrase, you don't give what you don't have? Like if I had an abusive family, will I be loving to my future family or not?
It's a good point. I mean, someone smarter than me said 180 degrees from sick is still sick. You know, so if you overcompensate to the other extreme, you're probably not doing it right either. You know, like if I felt like no love, so I'm going to dote you no matter what and 100% and not let you be, that's probably not the right call either. I think it comes down to knowing that you want to live a little bit differently, identifying the resources, you know, whether these are mentors that, you know, you see on TV or the neighbor or like the relationship from that an aunt or uncle have together, or someone, whatever it is that you perceive as being the kind of model, right, that you want to live by. I think you can overcome that. But I think the reaction in the exact opposite of the pendulum is, I think comes with some trouble as well.
I mean, Adler says we can fight through our inferiorities, right? We can be driven to do better things by our inferiorities. Many of you have heard about this professor named Abraham Maslow. Maslow himself grew up in an abusive household. He did. Mom was very abusive towards him, and I mean, he probably thought about doing things differently, and tried.
He also had the influence of his aunt
Of
as
course,
well.
and he was intelligent,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, people around him.
Can I chime in on that one?
Please.
Because I do think that people who grow up in abusive situations, your unconscious, your default mode is to repeat what was done to us. That's just kind of how it goes, unfortunately. However, like Mitch was saying, if you have, it's not just having the knowledge, but it's also having the awareness to change the behavior. Because in the heat of the moment, we tend to reenact what we know. If you can build the awareness around those things, I think that's the key to the behavior change. It's not just knowing I want to parent differently. It's really being aware of what my automatic processes are so that I can make some movement in a better direction for myself.
Yeah, it's very effortful. I agree.
Yeah.
You have to to have that. You have to be very mindful and very effortful in your approach and intention. So I think we have.
The APA just published a new study, I think, this past week that said 44% of people who experience trauma, if you have support around you, people around you that you can kind of relate to and connect to, you're less likely of experiencing, like you're more likely to just build resilience and keep moving forward. So having somebody around you is a big deal.
Do you think Victor would even be able to given he gave the bride and like the permission to go to South America, would he even allow them to? Is he too controlling for that?
I know in the book, one of the things he talks about is the possibility of them reproducing. I think that was another big concern for him, and as to why he would not be okay with them just moving to South America. But I think that your point is well taken about needing some control over the situation. Though that said, his initial reaction was to run away and to cede control, if you will, just pretend it didn't happen.
I don't think you could have stopped the creature. Creature was all over the place, doing his own thing.
I mean, I agree with your point. He was very controlling, right? Because when you look at he cut off all the ties socially, stopped writing to his family during the creation process. So I think the ownership piece, I don't know. I think he would have it would have been the same goal times two, destruction at those two. That's just my 2 cents in that.
I think we have time for one more question. Does anybody have something else? Oh, Troy, over there.
We've talked about the bride a lot, and in terms of moral implications, to create the bride, that would be to create life to satisfy the monster. You're specifically creating her to satiate him. And in terms of why the doctor created the monster, that was for either scientific knowledge or fame or whatever, but it's all morally very muddy. Just in general, why do people have kids in the first place?
All of us that become parents wonder that at some point.
Yeah.
I mean, psychology has answered that question in different ways. I think that one of the dominant theories in psychology is by Erickson, who would suggest that, even if when we're younger, we feel like we don't want kids, that we get to a point in our life where we have a biological drive that tells us we need to impact the next generation. And whether that drive results in having kids or whether that drive results in doing something meaningful to help the next generation, you can satisfy that drive in multiple ways, but that there is this push to impact the next generation. And again, other theories have other ideas. If you want to think about Darwin, for instance, he would suggest that that would be one of our 2 basic biological drives. That if we didn't have that drive, we wouldn't be here as a species. That there has to be some kind of biological push beyond just a cultural expectation, that there's also a biological push.
For those students of mine that are taking their exam next week, that's stage 7, by the way, the generativity stage for Erickson.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to our panel members here who did a wonderful job.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
a-
you for
have a great week.
attending, and thanks for joining us.
Have a good day, guys.
If you're in my class and didn't sign in, there's a sign-in sheet over here. If you're not in my class, don't sign the sheet.
The personality course also has a sign-in sheet in the back as well. Make sure you sign in for your extra credit. Amy, thank you.